Years ago, living in Taiwan, every time I rode the subway back to my stop in Taipei, the robot train announcer would say the same few words in Mandarin, and that's how I at least learned the name of my neighborhood. And catching a taxi back to my place one day, the driver asked where I wanted to go, and I proudly repeated the name the train announcer had said. The driver stared at me quizzically for a few seconds, then burst out laughing so hard it looked like his dick might come off, because what I'd actually learned to say was not my neighborhood, but doors open on the left side. I didn't know it then, but that experience would become emblematic for how my language learning life would unfold. Misguided ambition followed by unrelenting shame. Years later, I found myself in Bulgaria and was directed by email to what is literally in Bulgarian called Student City, where I was promised a room had been reserved for me as a student. I found the dorm building and I tried my hardest with guidebook Bulgarian to explain to the receptionist that I had a bedroom in the building. And which one was it, please? She said something back in Bulgarian and pointed me to the corner of the room, obviously directing me to wait while she looked up the information. I stood in the corner for 10 minutes, 20, half an hour, until finally a student came in who was kind enough to act as my translator with the receptionist. When everything was finally sorted, I asked my translator friend what the receptionist had been doing for half an hour. She replied, "Oh, she thought you were mad and told you to go away." I cannot explain it, but this was the beginning of my love affair with Bulgaria and with Bulgarian. This experience was the opposite of everything I'd grown up with in England. Direct, radical, and frankly abrasive. I also decided I should take learning the language seriously from there on. Arriving in my dorm room, I noticed I would be sharing it with someone else, though my mystery roommate was out at the time. I spotted a Bible and a fairly sizable ceremonial dagger of some kind. Not being particularly partial to theology or death by cold weaponry, I had my suspicions, but when he turned up later, he was lovely. A Turkish gentleman, and he spoke good Bulgarian, though no English. We devised some kind of non-verbal agreement that I would teach him English if he taught me Bulgarian. He began teaching me basic Bulgarian grammar, and in return, from me, he picked up things in English I hadn't even meant him to hear. His favourite being, well, that was a fuck up, wasn't it? One evening, he'd gone to visit his family, and another friend and I were, taking in the town, and we'd run out of rolling papers for, special cigarettes. We asked for some in Bulgarian at a gas station and got only a confused look in response. I later learned I'd been asking for newspapers, not rolling papers, so fair enough. We retired back to my dorm room and constructed a bong from a mop bucket and a bottle of lemonade, and that did just fine. The next day, coming to on my friend's sofa, I noticed it was 2 in the afternoon and my roommate would be back at the dorm soon and walk in on all of the paraphernalia we'd left lying around. I raced home quick as I could, only to walk in on him sitting on his bed, reading the Bible. Tinfoil and lighters festooned everywhere from the night before like the remains of some debaucherous alien invasion, and he looked up from his Bible and said, in what I thought was a rather good British accent, "Well, that was a fuck up, wasn't it?" Initiating something of a schism in the friendship from then on. So, having pissed off my roommate, it became incumbent upon me to seek out a Bulgarian teacher, which I did, and quickly discovered that learning Bulgarian was no small feat. To begin with, like many European tongues, it's gendered, so nouns are male, female, or neutral. Us idiot foreigners forget the gender of Bulgarian nouns all the time. I still have no idea what makes a cup Miss Cup or a buttocks Mr. Buttocks, but I've noticed that native speakers just never seem to mix them up, ever, which is kind of interesting. I also discovered, fortuitously, that as alien as Cyrillic looks, you can learn to read it in a few days at most, and usually it's phonetic, as in, if you can read it, you can probably say it out loud, unlike insane, stupid English spelling. And finally, I discovered that Bulgarian is one of the most beautiful languages in the world, full of gorgeous-sounding counterparts to what to me have always sounded dull in English. Not pinecone, but shisharka. Not suggestion, but predloženie. Not let's draw a penis and leave, but pishikur I dasi hodime. A new and very beautiful world opened up ahead of me. And of course, a new, very embarrassing, very shameful world opened up too. Many things simply don't translate if you try to do them literally. I quickly learned that while "I feel like a sandwich" is a perfectly reasonable sentence in English, in Bulgarian you will receive some strange looks as you've literally ontologically declared yourself to be a sandwich. I took to carrying a notebook and writing down phrases I'd heard during the day. My friend was having an argument on the phone once and said the phrase "Ty prosli sibe," which sounded pretty cool. I wrote it down and asked her what it meant, and still distracted in anger, she rushed out the explanation of, "Oh, it's for when someone's being silly." Days later, in the supermarket, the cashier didn't give me quite the right change, and I smiled and tried to say playfully, "Hey, ty prosli sibe." She said nothing and stared up at me. Not sure if she'd heard, I repeated it louder and noticed the entire queue was staring at me now. I would later find out this doesn't mean "you're being silly" exactly, but something a lot closer to "are you fucking brainless?" I haven't been back to that shop since, but my mind has many, many, many times. But just how much more I had to learn was illustrated rather starkly to me one morning when I woke up to find one of my balls was in horrific pain. I could barely stand up, and I thought to myself, this is one of those things that's either nothing or very, very bad. Panicking, I hobbled to the nearest hospital, and when the receptionist asked what was wrong, I suddenly realized I didn't know the words in Bulgarian for anything I had to describe. At last, I said, "Help, the circle is hurt." "Is it really?" the receptionist replied, presumably about to tell me that psychiatry was down the hall. I found a urologist finally and managed to sort of describe what was going on, but this conversation was even worse. "Well," the doctor said, "the procedure is very something. Now, I'm going to put this something up your something. Meanwhile, you just something." "Oh, good," I said, and I shit you not, there I lay, the doctor with one hand on my junk, when he said in English, "Cough?" I coughed. No, he said, "The word for this is cough, yes?" "Yes," I said, and still with one hand on my junk, he used the other to high-five the doctor sat opposite, presumably regarding some long-standing vocabulary question they'd had about English. I don't know. I made a note to never go back to that hospital, and I was fine, by the way. It seemed to just be a pinched nerve from a herniated disc. Turning 30, you're gonna love it. And it's even worse that many of the people here, in Sofia, the capital city at least, speak English better than I do. An almost daily occurrence consists of me walking into a shop, asking for something in Bulgarian, and getting a reply in perfect English of, "Certainly, and do you need anything else, sir?" More often than not, this then degenerates into a bizarre situation where I remain talking in shit Bulgarian out of pride for having spent several years learning your bizarre fucking grammar, and this kind shop assistant remaining in perfect English just to be nice and accommodating. This is redonkulous. And of course, cultural differences can be just as disorienting. For example, and I hope I'm not being too general here, back home it's quite normal to spend an evening being pleasant to someone at a party who you secretly think's a fucking moron just to avoid awkwardness. In my new homeland, this wasn't the case so much. If someone didn't like you, they'd be pleasant, but they wouldn't make a huge effort. The upside of this is that it means if someone is being kind to you or taking an interest, then you know for sure it's the beginning of an actual friendship, and you can dispense with the bullshit formalities immediately. It took some getting used to, but this is a far, far more human way to behave, and I really appreciate it. The better I got in Bulgarian, and I'm still not good by any metric, the stranger and deeper the culture got, and the more I fell in love. From Vazov to Aziz, there is something here looking back deep into its own history. Part antiquity, part modern day at the same time. A love of poetry, a love of insane parties. And fuck me, do Bulgarians know how to party. There is something ancient and weird and beautiful living here. A spirit that pervades the culture and the mindset. I can't put it into words for you, but the countryside, the folk music, the way Vitosha mountain looks around dawn, the indomitable belief of the Bulgarian people that despite a fucked political situation, things can and will one day be better if they just keep fighting for it. I'm home. And whenever I go home, back to sleepy England, to my school friends, to my family, they're all having perfectly nice lives there because England is a wonderful country. The countryside is beautiful, the history is insane, and we love our pets. But though I can't help but speak with a British accent, though I still drink tea on hot days, though that was where I was born and raised, it took me a few decades to work out that I am not British. I am Balkan, and Bulgaria shall forever be where my heart lives. And I hope one day you come to love it too. Благодаря и довиждане.